All right, well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Josh Clark. I'm the head of school of Landmark School, and this is a series of EdChats where I have this remarkable opportunity to speak with some of the best and brightest folks in the field of AI, in dyslexia, in education, to better understand how our world is changing and how it can be influenced and made better and also made more complicated by a world infused with AI. And I have just this amazing opportunity today to have Dr. Jinjun Xiong. Did I do it correct, Dr. Xiong? I did it. Thank you. Joining us today, Dr. Xiong is the co-director and scientific director of the National AI Institute for Exceptional Education that is housed at the University of Buffalo. You're also a professor of engineering. Is that right, Dr. Xiong? Am I saying that correctly?
So I'm the Empower Innovation Professor with the Computer Science and Engineering Department at the University of Buffalo. So he's a tenured professor. So
wonderful, good. Yeah. So a man of many talents. And am I right too that you also had time spent at IBM as working in IBM in the outside of the higher ed? Is that correct as well?
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. Yes, I joined the University of Buffalo 2 years ago. And prior to that, I spent more than 15 years with IBM TJ Watson Research Center and in the headquarters, which is downstate of New York, Yorktown Heights.
Oh, gotcha. So it wasn't that big of a difference to go. I was thinking you're going to be in Silicon Valley to Buffalo, which would be a big change, but no. Well, good. Well,
no, I have been to Silicon Valley, but but now yes, and since after my PhDs, I graduated from UCLA, and since my PhD days, I've been in the state of New York. Yes.
Good. Well, again, so wonderful to have you. So honored to have you. And I can't wait to dig into all kinds of things. I had the great honor of listening to Dr. Xiong on a kind of an online conference not too long ago, I believe, formed by some Stanford students, AIX. And that's when I first got to learn more about your work and all the exciting things that are coming out of this institute. But before we jump into that, as I think I shared with you ahead of time, I always said to myself, if I ever got the opportunity to interview just interesting people, I'd always want to start by talking about school and what school is like for them, because it's this, I think, many ways a great equalizer, because it's what most of us experience, no matter where we go in life. Something that we all share in common is school. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about what the school was like for you.
Sure, definitely, Josh. Yeah, but before I start that one, I want to just make a small corrections of the kind of intro about how we get to know each other, right? It's through this online AI Ed conference, and that is actually was organized by a student from Illinois, and yeah, but he's going to Stanford for the master's, but he is a student at Illinois. So just want to give the credit.
Yeah, give credit where it's deserved. Right. And you also taught at Illinois. So yes, we thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yes. Okay. Now to your question about my experience at the school, right? And of course, my experience kind of probably different from a lot of the audience here. And I came to the US after I got my bachelor's degrees and back to China. So most of my K-12 kind of the schooling experience is in China. And also, that's a pretty long time ago, right? So my experience is quite different, in terms of the class size, and which is much bigger class size and many rows of the chairs, and you sit in the back, you're barely able to hear what the teacher is saying, right? And use the blackboard, and not so much of interactivity, right? And basically, the teacher just teach you, and you just listen, take your notes, and learn on your own. That's pretty much all my learning experience, in my early days. And yeah, it's quite different from the US. Now I have kids here, going to the US school system. I can see, yesterday I went to the school and to see my son's the school, meet the teachers. Even before he started the school, I get to know who the teachers are, how the classroom looks like, and that's wonderful, And I just wish I could reborn to attend the U.S. school system again. and relearn all the things. And but yeah, and it's different.
Sure, yeah. And just knowing the field that you're in and your expertise, is it fair to say you were kind of drawn and always interested and maybe had an aptitude for math and science, and even when this kind of environment where you're somewhat listening and having to learn a little bit on your own, that's an area that you just gravitated towards?
Actually, okay, that's not necessarily okay, true. Yes, I have a lot of interest in the kind of the STEM educations, but actually in my early educations, actually I'm quite interested in non-STEM related topics too, and but the kind of that's a kind of the cultural differences. That's why my schooling difference at that time, and people going to the school like a STEM, right, was considered as a bride, and also more people kind of because you're doing well in your school, and then you want to be learning the tough stuff, hard subject, and that's how you go to choose the subject. That's what I mean. I started to kind of get into that space. Okay, now I devoted more of my time into math, engineering, etc., and then that led to my whole career into this science and engineering. But yeah, it's not something like I can somehow was when I was born, I'm drawn into the math. No, it's just by the nature of a choice, And but I always kind of holding this kind of attitude, right? No matter what you pick, since you pick the subject, try to learn, try to love about it. So and yes, no matter which field I'm into, and I'm actually having into different subjects, I always having this kind of attitude, trying to learn the new subject and learn to love it.
Good. And well, good for you, because I must say I had about a day where I tried to love math and then I gave in completely. So I'm glad to know you persevered. And get on the same topic, just out of curiosity. So as you find yourself in this field, how did you get attracted to AI? Where did you kind of again find yourself in this, or where did that connection come from?
Well, that's a great question, and no, I'm not joined to the AI from the beginning. And when I was going to the college, I'm starting with after the college, the K to 12, I went to the college, I went to the graduate school, I got the PhD. During all my education time period, right? AI is in the period of so-called winter, right? If you are interested in the AI, you are probably difficult to find a job, it's probably difficult to get the grants, and which means that your professors cannot fund you, right? So unlikely you'll find a professor who has grants in AI. So no, I'm not. So, but my training is about the data, about the math, about the optimization, and that's how I started. And actually, when I first go to like join the IBM, right, as a researcher, my areas was to designing algorithms, designing the software that can automate the process of designing the high performance microprocessors, right? That's what drives a lot of this computations. And of course, we use a lot of the math, use a lot of the statistics, a lot of the data analysis, a lot of the optimizations. And that's how I started my career. And later on in the IBM, IBM have this, okay, I would say probably 3 phases of this realization of AI. When I joined IBM, okay, a few years later, IBM have this big smart planet initiative, which is you try to kind of basically kind of use the bigger data, right, to revolutionize our understanding of various industries or business processes. And IBM coined the term of the smart planet. And that's how I started working on the smart energy. How do we use my skills in data and my skills in training in the electrical engineering or computer engineering to better modeling renewables, right? The renewables is the uncertainties. How do we manage uncertainties so we can better manage our power grid? And from that one, this kind of period of, we call ourselves bigger data, right? Period. And then the next one is IBM, invented this Watson, right, machine that competed the Jeopardy, right? And that is the time IBM realized, kind of basically woke up the whole world, right, about the power of this type of technology that can understand unstructured data, that are able to compete the 2 of the best human champions in Jeopardy and still won, right? And IBM is wondering what the terminology should we use. AI was not hot, right? AI is still in the winter, so we should come with a new terminology. And then IBM coined a new term called cognitive computing. And that's the period I was at IBM. I literally remember, right? And IBM has to explain to the world what's the difference between cognitive computing and AI. And we have to say, this is not the traditional AI, right? This is a new era of cognitive computing. And I think that's kind of one thing led to the other, right? That's 2011, after IBM made the world debut, right, of this Watson technology. And IBM even founded a business, like cognitive business, and how to use the cognitive computing to revolutionize the business. And I think that's kind of a woke up the whole world, saying, oh, IBM's have that technology, what it is. People started to look into this. Oh, you are looking into the data, you are trying to find the patterns, and you have this intelligent algorithms. That seems like to be exactly like AI many years ago, right? And that's kind of how people get educated. Oh, AI actually is pretty powerful, And that's starting to see people kind of getting out of the ditch of this AI winter. And now you are seeing this new boom of the AI. This is now we are in the third AI booms in the history, And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I gradually put into the AI, I started with this designing the microprocessors, and now about the electrons, and then analyze the big data for the smart energy, and then into this cognitive business. Now everybody's in AI. I'm also in the world of AI, and that's how my career path looked like.
That's fascinating. I mean, certainly for your, as you as an individual going through this career, but also the fact I mean, I remember Watson clearly. I remember the whole Jeopardy thing, and how funny that at the time they had to distinguish. It's this AI was in this winter, like you said, so it wasn't a hot term. So we had to make up something, and now here we are, right back to what's cognitive computing? What's that? That's fascinating, and I think too it's so interesting to hear that story because it also speaks to, I think, the potential, well, I mean, the potential in general, the potential impact of this kind of field of study, in that you can do smart energy, right? You can do Jeopardy. And here we are talking about applications for students with speech and language in schools. I mean, that's, it's not often that it's that clear of a connection, right? Through these different different intersections. So fascinating. You somewhat just did this, but out of curiosity, when someone asks you what is AI in its simplest terms, because again, it can mean so many things, and again, you just gave us a great example of that. How do you kind of simplify your definition of AI?
Right. I think that this is a couple of things, I would say probably two type of explanations, for people, right, who have never heard of AI or now kind of get puzzled about AI. I'd like to first clarify, right? When people talk about this AI these days, in the media, it's very general interpretation now, right? They are kind of generalized, like anything related to data, right? Anything related to optimization, anything related to the deep learning, machine learning. Now people kind of do not distinguish subtle differences. They say, hey, they all call it AI. That's why you see many people say, hey, what are you working on? I'm working on AI. And some of the business people, right, say, hey, I'm using AI to revolutionize my business. So that's kind of a general definition of AI, which is okay, which means people realize the power of computing, right? And able to kind of the power also of the data, and that it can make their business more automated, more intelligent. So I think that is the generalized definition, right? And for the general public, I think that's okay definition, just anything, right? Using the computing to make things better, smarter, right? And more automated and more productive. You can say, hey, this is some kind of AI. This is a more generalized definition. If for the people who are more into this domain, right, and they say, hey, what's the differences of AI? And I would say it's more of so you need a distinction. What is AI? What is machine learning? Or what is the data mining, right? And for the AI itself, you can have this narrow AI, and also you have this general AI, like the kind of weak AI or the stronger AI. The stronger AI means like the movies you saw, right? Like a Terminator, Wall-E, and all of those movies. That is basically really you make it a machine, which is the computing, right? To be able to act understand, interact with a human, like a really the other, like a human, right? That is called the general intelligence, which is much more difficult. It's a long-term kind of the scientific vision we try to achieve, but I think we are still probably decades away from that reality. That's my view. The weak AI, right, again, is to designing better computing programs to analyze the data, right, with little supervision, and it's kind of like the human learn things, right? Learn from the data, correct by doing experience of this, what you learned, right? And able to self-improve, which means the system becomes more intelligent as you feed more data or experienced more of this outcome of your interactions. That is the area of AI, the weak AI. I think a lot of the current solutions actually in this weak AI kind of a space, and that you can see, we can feed more data to be able to recognize images better, right? And feed more data, we can learn the self-driving, autonomous driving much better. Elon Musk recently showed the announcement, right? And able to train the learning, self-driving is end-to-end, and without any kind of the human interactions, just learn itself by it better. And that is a very narrow kind of specific task and getting better, right? But not a generalized intelligence.
Sure.
So I'm okay. Yeah. My definition.
No, it's so helpful too, because I think a lot of us that are outside of the space and watching the news and we do feel like an invention has happened. Like, oh, they made this thing and it's contained unto itself, right? Versus a multitude of technologies and kind of approaches coming together. And I also find it so fascinating for obviously you and your space and your perspective to describe things that are mind-blowing to me as kind of like first generation weak AI versus decades from now, and what could be. Because I get, just a self-driving car is mind-blowing to me, absolutely mind-blowing. So it gets, just fascinating field. But so with that, one of the things that the reason I wanted to have these series of conversations and the reason I'm interested in this work, among other things, is primarily the idea of how can we benefit students who traditionally are marginalized in schools, who traditionally go unidentified, and my mission in life when it comes to this work around AI is to make sure we don't forget these kids, right? That we don't revolutionize education by perpetuating inaccuracies and myths and so on and so forth. And so when I came across your work, I was just so excited for what the Institute for Exceptional Education is doing. And so could you, you obviously are much more equipped to describe it than I. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of the mission of the work, where you're focusing and where we might be going?
Sure, yes. I think that you touch upon a very good point. And that's actually really how I was drawn into this subject, right? So you speak of this education, and education matters to everyone, right? To our society. But there's a larger population, I think the people traditionally get marginalized. Now you ask yourself, ask myself, right? Why education didn't help this kind of populations? There's multiple reasons, right? One is the resources, right? That is probably one of the fundamental resources, meaning are you able to provide a quality education, right? Be it the teachers and the service providers to those people, right? And the second, are you able to deliver the content, right, to the level of their needs or not, right? Of course, we have this K-12, we kind of put the people, right, into the bucket of K1, 2, 3, right? And based on the general development of progression, right, knowledge getting more difficult. But there are some exceptions, right? And some kids has different needs, they may, even the physical age may be there, but the levels may be different. If you do not know, or you are not sensitive enough, then whatever you are teaching, right, is not conducive for their learning, right? And that is the issues too. And the third is about the tools, right? About the method, about the content. Even though you know what is the best content, even though you know what is the most suitable content, but it takes time to create it, right? And given the first constraints of the resources about the training of the teachers, service providers, you're limited. How are you going to spend extra time to create the customized content? So all of this, right, somehow constrains, the quality of education. I'm not touching upon other aspects. Like there's also poverty, the income levels, community. That's another separate kind of the societal kind of constraints. But I think from from educator point of view, right, what we can control is can we make sure, okay, this teaching resources, right, be more available, right? Can we make sure, okay, we can identify the kids' needs better, right? Can we customize the content for the kids better? So these are the three things, I was like major things, right? Kind of drawing to, hey, can we use technology, right, to help address this kind of issues? And so the National Science Foundation and the Department of Education, IES, they happen to have this great vision, say, hey, how can we use AI to help education, right? And 2 years ago, when they first came out as a call for proposals, they explicitly list of this opportunity, right? Not only about the general education, also education. Can you use about this children with disabilities? What can you do with it? So that's how I started to get into the space, thinking of this one. How should I use technology to help children with disabilities? And then the very first question is, which aspect you want to help, right? And the children with disabilities, by the nature of their disabilities, there's so many different kinds of disabilities, right? And every kind of disabilities has different challenges, different needs. So that's how I started looking into some of the literatures, documents, and I was really surprised. I didn't know this one before, right? Like in the U.S. Department of Education, in the school system, any children, right, in order for you to receive the special education services, you need to be put into one of the 13 categories, right? And which means certain category of disabilities, right? Such as specific learning disabilities, right? Or speech or language impairments, and autism, right? Developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, emotional disturbance, etc. They have 13 categories. And you need to be somehow, right, be evaluated, diagnosed by the professionals to be labeled into one of the 13 categories. And then you can be qualified, right, to receive the special education services. And then that's how you sign into kind of receiving the service in the system. Then I look at which one should I help. Initially I thought, maybe I should help the people with hard of hearing. Reason being, I'm at the UB, and we have a neighboring institute, like Institute Rochester Institute of Technology, right? They have a school of this about the deaf and hard of hearing people. Maybe that's a good partners. But then when I look at the numbers, right? In the US, we have about 7 million, children in these school systems. And the people in the hard of hearing, it is still a good number of population, but the total percentage-wise is relatively small. In order for me to develop technology, you say, well, our resources is limited, right? You want to make sure you use the limited resources to benefit the most of as many populations as possible. So that's why I started to look into this space, saying, okay, looks like, and by talking to a lot of people, I'm saying, after all of the many conversations, my conclusion seems to be like the following, no matter which categories of disability that these children belong to, at the end of the day, a larger portion of their special education services is about learning, right? And the learning is about the speech and about languages. So that's how I started talking to people who can provide a speech and language services for those people with disabilities, no matter which category they come from, right? That is called a special speech and language pathologist. I talked to the people in this speech and language pathologist, and then I realized in the school systems, they are one of the most kind of heavily stressed populations in terms of special education teachers, right? And in the whole school system, we have only less than 61,000 speech and language pathologists in the school system. Yet we have more than 3.4 million of children receiving the services. So which means every SLPs, in terms of caseload, right? That's a huge caseload, right? And in terms of the services, every child probably on average, I'm talking on average, maybe some school districts is better than others, right? But on average, the back of the envelope of computation, you probably less than 40 minutes of services per week. So that's, you can see how that can be beneficial for the kids, right? If they're only able to receive such kind of limited amount of service per week. And that's okay. Okay, how can we develop some technology to help this group of people for this particular services, right? So this kind of I would say this use case driven approach helps me to narrow, right? What are the technologies I need to develop? What are the areas I need to focus on? And that's how I kind of come to this, let's say, a vision or this a plan, and to say, hey, let's develop a technology, right? Let's use AI to solve some of the most pressing societal needs, which means can we scale, right, the resources up in terms of the speech and language pathologist, their available time, right, their skills to scale SLPs, so we can provide better services for the children who are in need of speech and language services. So that's kind of putting things together. That's how I'm working on this institute, and we got this grant, and we work on this in this space. Yeah.
Well, I love it, and there's so much I want to dive into. With that, first, I love the very altruistic and yet practical approach, right? Of let's figure out what can we scale. I think that makes all sense in the world. And as you were talking, I wrote down, and to your point, the challenges you have to overcome of not enough resources, not enough training, and then essentially just not enough time to implement that training into something. And outside of my role as a school leader, in my advocacy work, I spend so much time trying to get adults to learn new things, to change their behavior, to then have to create stuff that doesn't exist. So this resonates so much. But to dive in a little bit, am I right that the Institute is helping in the area of speech and language? There's going to be a screener, and then there's an orchestrator, which I love that, if I'm coining that correctly, I love that term. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like or what the goal is with that?
Sure. Yeah. And before we kind of explain this particular two terminology, we can kind of coin these two terms for our solutions. One is called AI screener, one is called AI orchestrator. But in order for you to understand why we kind of propose these two solutions, right, as our institute's goal, you think of the whole process of helping children, right, with the speech language, or the children with disabilities, maybe even more general, right? You can think of the 3 steps process, right? The first one, you need to be identified, right? So which means the children need to say, hey, I see, maybe this children have some kind of issues or some kind of special need. I want you to be identified. Once you get identified, doesn't mean you are qualified, right? Because sometimes, so that's then you go to the second step, which is the kind of, in a sense, the eligibility determination, right? And that is to go through this formal diagnosis assessment, and then go through the whole school systems in terms of they have the legal process, in a sense, right? Finally, at the end of the day, you get a contract between the school district, and the family about this particular child indeed have the special needs, and what are the services school should provide, right? And what the frequency, etc. So this is becomes called an individualized educational plan, right? So this is something like it's a legal document in a sense between the school and the family. This is the second step. The third step is now you have the special needs, you have the educational plan. Now in the school system, you need to find the special education teachers or the SLPs to help you, right, to consistently making the progress. And that's called intervention. So this kind of, we look into this whole process. Hey, there's 3 major, I try to simplify things a little bit. Say, hey, there's 3 major things, right? And the middle step, it's a very complicated legal process, right? Because it's a lot of the factors, in play, in policies, and there's a legal process. So they say, this is too complex right now, right? I'm not saying it is still important, but it's too complex and a lot of the things. On the other hand, this is screening. We feel it's very important. If we are able to open more opportunities for kids, right, to be identified early, so we can provide intervention early. So there's a lot of evidence saying early intervention is effective. But unfortunately, in the US, because of the resource constraints, we cannot do this so-called early screening or the universal screening, right? A lot of the kids, wait till they go to the kindergarten, right? Then they have some kind of a limited amount of time with the schools to do some kind of screening. Even that one is not universal, right? So that's my, hey, can we use AI technologies to develop a solution called AI screener to help this screening process, make the screening more universally accessible, right? So, and early. So that's how we come with this vision of the first solution. It's called AI screener. The second one is this third step, right, which is intervention. And also back to my early comments about the constraint in the system, right? The resources, the time, as you also mentioned, the SLPs have too many case load and they do not have enough time. So can we provide a solution to help the SLPs to keep a track of each individual children, like a child's need, right? And also provide more quantified progression report, and then able to recommending the evidence-based or the optimal, right, or customized intervention method for the teachers to prescribe to every single child. Maybe over time, when the technology becomes more mature, and some of the tasks, right, the SLPs can delegate to the AI to do it automatically. Yeah. So that's why they save the SLP's time, so SLPs can focus on the most critical things, right, requires the SLP's knowledge. So it becomes this AI and human collaboration. So this whole thing, right, because you can see AI is some kind of doing a lot of things, right, understanding the children's interaction with the teachers, monitoring the progressions, and also showing the reports to the teachers, and also make recommendations, help the teachers to kind of to do these interventions. So that's why a lot of things is kind of like a conductors, right? That's why I would say it's called orchestrator, the orchestration of the process to help the SLPs to do their job better. So this is called AI orchestrator. These are the two solutions that we envision, right, will be the best use of AI technology, and also can challenge, right, the state of the art of AIs. Can you deliver the solutions, like what do we envision here?
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting to hear you, and it was very helpful to kind of conceptualize. We identify, we qualify, we intervene. And you're right, the qualification piece is so complicated, but I would also imagine the less resource constraint we become, the more that we are able to leverage AI to help more kids, the less the scarcity of, qualifications aren't a scarcity game anymore, right? We don't, right. But with that, tell me the screener piece, right? Couple questions. One is in the field of speech and language, which I know enough to be dangerous. I'm far from an SLP, but is the screener looking for students who have maybe articulation difficulties, and or students who also maybe have articulation difficulties, or they just have language processing, right? The expressive or the receptive. And what does it actually look like, or would look like, for a student when they interact in the screener?
Right. So, I mean, the short answer is kind of a both, right? So you need to look into the current practice. Of course, we always try to say that the AI cannot do things, the human cannot do, right? AI is only helping humans to do the things, the human better. So now we look into the current practice and how we identify, right, the children. So for the screening purpose, the way you do it, either someone, right, come with some kind of a test, right, a set of tasks, and you ask the children to do it, and then you observe how the children perform those tasks, and those tasks have something related to the speech, right, including the articulation and many others as well, and also including about the languages, right, about the communications, and also about the testing, about the understanding, right? So there's different test different aspect of it. The problem right now is, first again, you need to have this test, right? This test it's quite expensive, and because it's a copyrighted material, so it's very expensive, and that's why it's not universally accessible. Second, even you can afford the cost, get the test, you need to have someone to observing the whole interaction, right? How kids responding to the question, how the kids, performing the task. And sometimes, the teacher need to be there, to interact with the child. So that's why it takes time. And afterwards, as the specialist, as like the human, right, we still need to go back to analyze the interaction process. You draw your conclusion, right? Hey, based on this interaction, I see these children may have some issues. The issue could be the articulation, or could it be understanding, or could it be something else? That's why, hey, these kids need to get a further assessment, right? Further kind of diagnosis. That's called a screening. Screening is kind of quick to want to get the yes or no answer. But even the folks, you want to be quick, but you can see it takes time. So that's why we want to use AI. I mean, that's similar to be a perfect use of AI. If the AI, for example, right, you think of the AI is able to come up with some kind of interface to interacting with the child. We call it embodiment. This embodiment can be multiple factors, right? Let's assume, okay, in the simplest factor, AI is kind of like an iPad, okay? The iPad able to give you this test, for example, right? And the kids can interact with this test, and you can click it, or you can speak about it. You can kind of have some conversation with this app, for example, right? And this whole thing can be recorded. Now the AI can, based on this understanding, based on this kind of captured interactions, and try to figure out how the children responding to this question. How fast are they responding to this question? When the children speak certain things, right? Are they speaking clearly or not, right? And what are the issues of the sentences? If able to use AI to understand, to do all this kind of analysis, it's kind of like humans doing all of the analysis. And if the AI is able to detect, seems like this articulation has some issues, right? When the kids speak about, like, say, a particular word, right? Like, say, the bag, right? Maybe he said pack or something. Let me try to cut this out, snippet this out, right? This is the evidence I find. Now the AI can generate this report to the specialist or the parents. Look, in this interaction, I see these children, when they speak this particular word, you can hear it. I think there's some issues, right? Or you look at this one, and when I say this particular questions, it takes so much time for this kid to respond. So now it becomes a very much evidence-based report, right? Very informative for the parents or for the teachers to review. And then they can make a decision. Should I take this kid to further kind of the diagnosis or not? So that's how I can say AI can help, right? In all of this aspect. So this is only the first stage. This is the kind of still test-based, right? It's a very structured kind of test. But we also know, like kids' interactions, some of the things, right? In a very constrained environment test, whatever the kids' behavior, which is different when in this free form, right? More natural settings. So now our next version will be, can we even to extend AI, right? To observing kids in the most natural settings, be it playing with the parents or playing with other kids, right? Be it at school or be it in the playground or maybe at home. Are you able to constantly analyze, right? Kind of monitoring and to kind of produce similar reports. Of course, kids, parents, or the teacher, right, can stop this kind of observation, anytime you like. But if you like to, you can let them to observe, right? And so now able to generate similar kind of report. This is the kind of hypothesis, right? I'm sure, okay, the reports from this free setting, right, the most natural settings interactions will be different from this test-driven kind of interactions. And maybe this can provide even better signals. But this will be our next step. Our first step is to try to replicate existing test-based screening to see how AI's capability looks like.
So much of that is unbelievable. I love this idea of maybe eventually, right, to your point, being able to observe a child in a very kind of non-intrusive way in a very natural way, right? Because then we get into social pragmatics and we get into, and we're not bringing the anxiety that we're bringing to the screening, and that phenomenal. And am I right too that this also potentially gives us an opportunity to even further individualize the screener for things like dialect or, a non-Western accent or just kind of cultural, I don't even know what you're talking about because I don't have that background knowledge. All of those things we could, I imagine, customize so much more than we can now. Is that also true?
Oh, thank you, Josh. I mean, you brought a very good question, right? And that's about us. Okay, we are from the very beginning. We are very much pay attention to, right? This is cultural sensitive, right? And some of this kind of the social background. You want to make sure your technology, right, is sensitive to this kind of differences. Yes, indeed, especially in the U.S., right? We have people from so many countries with so many different kind of backgrounds. The bilinguals, right? Even myself, my case is bilinguals. And there's also a lot of kids, when they brought up, right, they never maybe get exposed to the English, and not only go to the school system, they start to learn English. I mean, even though the English may be speaking differently or quite a level wise, right, maybe lower than the peers, but it doesn't mean these kids have any learning issues. So how do you develop, right, a screen technology that is culturally sensitive, right? And this is something, it's a kind of very, very interesting scientific question. And that's why in our institute, we have some of this best kind of the linguistic kind of scientists on our team, try to come up with some newer, right, screening technologies, which is different from the test-based. The current test-based is pretty much English dominant kind of the test, right? Can we come with some newer screening methodology that is language agnostic in a sense, right? Or the culturally sensitive kind of screening method. And that's why we want to develop this kind of technology. In the past, this was not very easy to do because you have to take a time to recording, right? This kind of interactions, do the transcribe of those interactions and try to find the signals. But now hopefully with the AI, we can automate a lot of this kind of interactions, and automate a lot of this information extractions. We can work with our linguistics, right, people, and the language of people. What signals do you think is most important, right, can become a signal that can be languagely kind of agnostic, culturally robust, and then help them to do the hypothesis test and come with all kinds of things, right? One of the metric, for example, we are thinking is called automaticity, right? Automaticity, in a sense, it's kind of try to test how natural or how much effort you need to put into your language when you try to communicate. This is something which is kind of, we believe is language kind of agnostic, right? It doesn't matter you speak English or Chinese or other languages, the way you communicate, how fast you can respond to a question, and how much repetitions you need to revise your responses, right? And how much time you need to pause before you to kind of speak out the next utterance. All of those things, if we can capture it quickly, I think we can be a good indicator of these people's speech or language capabilities. And that is something we want to do, right? Called automaticity measures. And that can be potentially a new metric that can become culturally sensitive, right? Language agnostic kind of screening metrics. But this need to be kind of developed along with the AIs so that we can test this hypothesis.
Yeah. I mean, just the idea. I love that the way you're phrasing it, of language agnostic, culturally robust, because we have the opposite right now. We have very language specific and very narrow cultural. We bring so much assumptions right now into how we do things. That's fascinating. Fascinating. All right. So tell me for a moment. So let's pretend the technology's been developed. We have identified the student as potentially having risk for. They go through a qualification process, which hopefully over time becomes less arduous. And then we get to the AI orchestrator. What do you imagine that looks like for a practitioner? What would their kind of user experience be?
Right. So now you look at the current school system, right? How the SLP is helping our children. So because of, as mentioned, because of the caseload, right? And every SLP need to see so many children. And what they do is they typically hold a group-based intervention, right? Meaning there's a bunch of kids, they have a similar age. They feel like okay, I should take them together, right? So now as SLPs, I will try to help them together. And of course, there's some benefit of being as a group-based intervention because they kind of learn from each other, right? There's a social aspect, which is great. But another aspect is that even though it's a group, maybe even a similar age, or maybe even similar kind of, you think it's similar symptoms, but every child's need is different, right? Even from the very beginning, if you prescribe a particular exercise, everyone's response will be different, right? Everyone's effort will be different. But all of this kind of things right now is kind of very difficult for SLPs to keep track of all of it, right? It's just too many things for them SLPs to juggle. And also what type of exercise to give, right? Because based on this particular child, maybe this exercise has no issue. Maybe other exercises have more difficulties. So now you need to customize some of this intervention method. Again, it's very challenging for SLPs to keep track of those differences, right? So that's where we think the AI can comes in. Think of this way. Now, if the AI you can think of AI as kind of superset of the AI screener, right? Able to observing this kind of interactions, right? If the teacher give you do the exercise, let's say starting from the same exercise. Now I see child A actually has no issue at all. Child B seems struggling, and the child the C have a slightly different kind of challenges, right? And now, after a few sessions, the AI can produce this kind of report, right? With specific evidence to show the teacher, hey, I think the child A have difficulty here because of his speaking slowly, and the child B because of seem like have articulation issues, right, etc. If I can produce a report for SLPs can immediately say, oh, next time when I meet these kids, A should do something different exercise, B should do some maybe other exercise, right? So this can help SLPs to provide better services. Now, going even further, right? Among all the possible intervention method, it is too many options, right? Sometimes SLPs just lack of time, they may not aware of some of the best practices, some of the best evidence-based practices too, right? Because SLPs may not know all the latest technology, the latest advancement of the interventions. But AI in the back end, they can digest all the literatures about interventions, right? And what is evidence-based interventions? What are the best practices? Plus, what are the available resources from the publishers in terms of the intervention method? If the AI can make the recommendations, like just like Netflix, recommending which movie to watch. Now you're recommending which intervention this SLP can use for this particular child will make the SLP's job much easier, right? And make this, they can practice more of this evidence-based interventions. This is the second level. Even the next level, now, people talk about the generative AI, right? AI that can able to generate the new content like the ChatGPT or the diffusion models to generate the pictures. Can you put those technology into the use? For example, now the kids is learning the articulations. And typically you get a flashcard, which is pre-made for the kids to learn. Now, can I customize the flashcard, right? Use AI based on the kids' need to generate content appropriate or maybe culturally sensitive flashcard for the kids to learn, to practice. This is the best use of the generative AI, right? So now you can see even the AI orchestrator has multiple faces as well. So we, from the very beginning, you can make it only helping to give the progression monitoring, right? Later on can have this customized recommendations. Later on can be even generate new content automatically customized for this kids, for this particular child as well. So there's many kind of like progressionally, we can make AI help the SLPs better and better.
I mean, again, I think that is absolutely exceptional, and to kind of go full circle to what I think you originally said. You have this group setting, and for folks that may not be in schools or understand, to me, it's there's got to be a better analogy, but it's kind of like an oncologist trying to treat a group of cancer patients who all just happen to have cancer, right? And obviously, we don't want to compare speech and language cancer, but it's just like, give me a break. So so much of that is fascinating to me, and even the idea of being able to to generate recommendations, but then generate actual materials maybe that align with those recommendations, and maybe also align with the kid. Maybe I'm much more interested in this because it's about baseball now than, something that I have zero, awareness of or interest in. It's exceptional. So 2 questions, because I want to be sensitive to our time. 2 questions regarding that. One is timeline. Is this decades away? Do you think, where do you think we're at before this becomes, kind of accessible to schools and more in common use?
Right, that is kind of a very tricky question, because you try to predict the future, right? It's kind of difficult. Yes, but I think, as I mentioned, I try to be pragmatic, right? Like in terms of the phases of approach, and some of the early phases, some of this can use AI to replicate the current practices, right? To make it this more automated and make it more trustworthy in terms of validation, right? So then we try not to deviate too much from the current practices, yet still can help. That is something we think we can achieve in the next few years, right? Because AI current capability is able to do so. There's also some of the things, as I mentioned, some of the better recommendation customization, right? We are evaluating current AI technologies, and we see there's some I would say probably quite a big of a gap, okay? Even though we see the AI seeming to be already very powerful, and that is only for a particular narrow field. When you try to take that technology, right, for the specific use cases, you will realize the AI's capability, right, is not enough. It's quite a big of a gap. And that's something why this project is funded by the National Science Foundation, right, which is well known for the fundamental science, and try to say, hey, you need to develop some more fundamental AI technologies. And that's something we think is much of a long term, but we are making good, consistent progress. The approach we are taking, right, again, try to be very much practical and also very much quantifiable. So we want to make sure that we evaluate current technology using the data, right, and quantify the kind of benefits, and then identify the gap, and then we do the investment into the gap. Make sure our whatever technology we develop is address the real need, right? And also when we put the technology back to the use, it can be kind of evaluated and validated, and then provide the immediate feedback for the researchers to further kind of develop or refine the technologies to make sure the technology always interlock with the solutions we need to develop.
Yeah, that's again so helpful, and I think again it's a misperception that many of us, myself included, and then initially thought, well, if AI can do this, it must be able to do that, and that it'll take like 6 months. So that whole framework makes sense. And so a follow-up question to that, and then again, you've been so generous with your time, so I'll get close to wrapping us up. But to that point where it's not as easy as, the fact that Midjourney can make a picture of me that looks like I'm in a painting from the Napoleonic period, it's pretty amazing. But that doesn't mean we can automatically, jump to this. As you build out this framework, and you're building it out, obviously specifically initially for a application in speech and language setting, is it possible that the framework itself, once that kind of gap is closed, if we wanted to apply something similar to phonemic awareness or phonological awareness, or more, maybe is that solely separate, or is it a little bit more not universal, but it would be more generative in the sense that if we could solve this problem, we might be able to apply it to other problems?
Oh yes, that's a wonderful question, Josh. Indeed, that's what I mean. Some of this what we call user-driven research, right? Like we use this use case to drive our understanding of the technology gap. But this technology gap does not only applicable for this particular use case. This technology we developed can be utilized for other type of use cases too. Not only within the speech, in the speech language per se, right? Like there's many other type of the challenges. We should be able to generalize it. Even for other type of the challenge use cases, right? The technology we are developing here can be utilized as well. Of course, the moment you take the technology to a particular use case, there still needs some kind of a customization, right? Some kind of a refinement that need to be done. But by and large, yes, the research we are doing here is a fundamental, and that it can be generally applicable for many use cases.
Incredible. So, before I ask you my last question, I just want to thank you because as somebody who has two dyslexic kids, who's dyslexic, and then also, I have the great privilege of running a school that is incredibly expensive, that people have to make huge sacrifices to be a part of, and what you are doing, I think is remarkable, and I just appreciate it so much because you are kind of living my dream right now of what if we were able to democratize what kids need. I mean, it's that simple. It should not be an issue of privilege, or even, exceptional opportunity. It should just be, we're able to give kids what they need. So thank you
Yes.
for not trying to invent, the next Bitcoin, and instead applying this to this field. Thank you.
Sure. And I mean, thank you for your work as well. Like the school you are heading. That's remarkable. I admire your visions as well. And a lot of the knowledge I get here, right? It's not like I know this kind of stuff, right? Because I talk to people like yourself, before this proposal, and that's how I learned these challenges. And I think it is really a partnership, and the people like the scientists, right, or the technologists like myself, working with people like you who have needs, right, from the specific use case domains, and let's work together, right? Let's make technology to be relevant to solve the societal issues, and it is great partnership.
I appreciate it so much. All right, so my last question that I love to ask everybody, and again, this has been so fascinating. Thank you. I get to have so many of these conversations, and they're very theoretical, and that's fun and fascinating. But to have a conversation that's driving towards a very specific solution, again, is just so encouraging. But with that, so if you had three things that you would leave us with to read, to watch, to listen to, can be about what we talked about, can be about having nothing to do with what we talked about. Do you have three recommendations you'd leave us with?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. There's so many things, Okay, let me start with something with AI related, right? Because we talk about AI. So I think there's an interesting book, called AI 2041. There's 10 visions for the future, right? It's by the famous kind of AI researcher Kai-Fu Lee, and also very young kind of novelist, and Chu Fan Chen, and it's on Amazon, right? It's a relatively new book. It's basically kind of the kind of hypothetical vision, right? Story-wise, what does AI will look like, and intertwined with the stories, and it's quite an interesting book. Maybe it's interesting. Called AI 2041. That would be the first one. The second one, I think maybe a little bit, okay, just try to be like a diverse, any like in kind of also my own cultural kind of sensitive, right, to my cultural background as well. I think the education, right, even though we're interested in education is not something new, I think we should say, right? Education has existed for a long, long time, and like me came from originally from China, and another book I think it would be called the Analects of the Confucians. Confucius is one of the best educators in China, and also something the sayings of Confucians, and his book, and even right now I think a lot of the wisdoms, right, about how should we learn from each other, especially we can learn from each other all the time, right? So and also life is about the continuous learning, and that can be a very good. As a lot of the wisdoms, which existed many thousands years ago, which is still true today, right? And we can always learn something new, and we should always continuously learning, and which is true for everybody. I think that would be a good a second book, if the Western audience didn't know, this could be a very good book to read. The third one, maybe we should maybe something fun, okay, which is less relevant to the AI, and it's a movie I actually watched recently, in the airplane, and it's rather probably 6 or 7 years ago old movie. It's called The Lion.
Okay.
I don't know, yeah, it's directed by I think it's a Garth Davis. Okay, or Garth Davis. Garth Davis. It's about it's an Indian kids movie, about kind of an Indian child was living in poverty, and they don't get to be adopted by an Australian kind of couple, and how they came back to find the root. And what I want to recommend is kind of like a lot of the kids, right, in the US didn't know how privileged we are, right? Even my own kids, right? didn't think of, they just take everything for granted. As I mentioned, like their school setting, right? It's my school settings. They take it for granted, like a small classroom with two or few teachers, they can get all kinds of educations in terms of the book access, resources, right? And the gyms, musics, everything. In my old school days, I don't even have access to the music after fifth grade or something, right? That's mean I'm poorly knowing about the music, and I dance poorly. But another kind of movie why I recommend it, it kind of shows you some of the children, right, in the world, they're living in conditions that you cannot imagine, right? And they cannot even get enough food. They cannot even get an education and are barely able to survive. And I think that could be a good movie for anyone, entertaining and also quite inspiring as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love as we think about 2041 in the future, and then also humbling ourselves to understand that, there's, even as we dream about what may be, we are still experiencing, many of us, a life of extreme privilege. So I think that's a great contrast. Well, this has been incredible. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking the time, for educating us all. Thanks to everybody who watched it. Absolutely phenomenal. So thank you.